This is freedom. You have the freedom by law to work for who you like. You're free to move to where the work is. You can even choose not to work at all. It's very easy to believe in those freedoms. It is, after all, what we've all been told for our entire lives. However, it's slightly harder to believe that all of those perceived economic freedoms are in fact illusions. That's despite the fact there's a very coherent argument that suggests those who live and work within a capitalist free market system are not free at all and are in fact essentially slaves. In order to understand this form of exploitation, which can be psychologically damaging in the same way chattel slavery was, you first have to accept that working class labour is never really voluntary. There are two fundamental reasons for this. The ultimate decision to employ someone is taken entirely by the employer. If the worker isn't prepared to sacrifice certain elements of himself, the employer is well within his rights not to hire him. Without state legislation to provide safeguards, the employer would also be able to fire the labourer for no reason other than to employ someone else more cheaply in order to maximise profits. The labourer has to do what the employer wants, or his livelihood could be in danger. He can't survive without his wages. The second reason requires a basic understanding of the labour theory of value, a concept coined by economic thinkers when the free market was much newer than it is now. It essentially argues that the value of any commodity is equal to the value of the labour required to produce it. Therefore, many people believe that if an employer charges a consumer more for a good or service than the cost of labour required to make it, then the employer is exploiting the labourer. Even though it's theoretically ridiculous that a worker can produce something far more valuable than his labour, this is what happens on a daily basis. Any surplus value is pocketed as profit by the capitalist, with the worker only compensated enough to eat and pay gas bills and so on. He therefore has to keep working. Karl Marx used this phrase to basically describe how as capitalist profits went up, workers' happiness generally went down. Before we continue, it's important to remember that labour theory is quite simplistic and just one of many attempts to interpret what gives things value in capitalist economics. Next, we're going to look at how it's not really surprising in a system that makes you compete for labour and where profit's the only goal that the workforce is being exploited. Many people believe that corruption and exploitation doesn't occur because the owners of the means of production are evil, but in fact because of what I've just said. In capitalism, profit is the only thing that matters. As the American economist Thorstein Veblen suggested, decisions are made not with ethics in mind, but with whether it's sound business. And if you're bound to this wage system, as most people are, don't think the government's going to help you. Even capitalist apologists have largely agreed throughout history that the state's just there to protect the interests of the rich. To prove that quotes like this are still relevant, when unions representing the interests of labourers caused some trouble in the 70s, Margaret Thatcher sought to crush them in the 80s, and she had lots of backing too.
A huge crowd and a huge cheer.
This has happened throughout history. When labour unions emerged around the time of the Industrial Revolution to counter the abhorrent working conditions, the English government passed the Combination Act in 1799. It prevented groups of workers from gathering together if it inhibited the ability of their employers to go about their business as usual. And finally, something to bear in mind for today. When leaders like David Cameron claim that making it easier to sack employees will get Britain working again, they are simply trying to make life easier for the wealthy. This whole issue of wage slavery is obviously incredibly complicated. There isn't even one accepted description of what capitalism is, yet it still remains largely unquestioned. The aim of this video is obviously to raise awareness about the issue of wage slavery. There are lots of theories and counter-arguments that we haven't included, the main one of which is the misguided belief that inequality, stratification and exploitation are simply a part of human nature. If you're interested, leave your comments below and maybe we can look into some of the other issues at a later date.